But why should you listen to a random guy in a white t-shirt standing in front of a whiteboard? Hi, my name's Matt. I'm currently a strategy associate at Google, and prior to that was a management consultant at BCG. Now today I want to talk about a common question that gets asked in not just interviews, but also networking situations, and that is the 2-minute story, or when someone asks you something like, tell me about yourself, or walk me through your resume. Now, I know there's a ton of advice out there online already about how to answer this kind of a question, but today I want to really bring it back to first principles, and even for myself, it's helpful to remind myself about what actually matters when it comes to successfully interviewing, because there's a lot of advice out there, but oftentimes a lot of it misses the mark and isn't actually what moves the needle. And so mastering the 2-minute story is helpful, not just for people who are, say, students currently in college or university, but also for people who are experienced professionals, and maybe you've had multiple jobs like myself. It never hurts to continually refine your ability to communicate your own experiences to other people, whether it be interviewers or just people that you are networking with or meeting on a daily basis at your company and outside of the office. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So first, let's start with asking ourselves the question, why does the 2-minute story matter? And to refresh our memory, there's, broadly speaking, I would say 2 big reasons why it matters. The first is that it is your, oftentimes, first impression in any kind of interview. And besides maybe the 5 seconds where you opened the door and shook their hand, or maybe you said hi to them as you entered the Zoom room, the 2-minute story is going to be the first time that you're opening your mouth and you're talking for longer than 20 seconds. And you're giving them a first impression of who you are, right? And this is critically important. I think some people underestimate how important this is. You have to realize that most people make up their mind about whether or not they like you within, say, the first 20 to 30 seconds of the interaction. And so obviously, it's not the only thing that goes into whether or not you pass the interview, but it's going to be a very important and critical point in the interview, because people remember the beginning and the end of any conversation that they have more than what was talked or discussed about in the middle. And so it's really important to nail the 2-minute story because of this. Similarly, it's setting the tone for the rest of the interaction that you have, right? So, for example, if you give the 2-minute story and it's really awkward and it comes across kind of forced and maybe you sound a little bit robotic, then that awkward energy, that nervous energy is going to go over to your interviewer, and they're also going to feel kind of weird, and they're going to be like, I don't know, man, like this person seems like a pretty nice guy, but like they really didn't know how to communicate their experiences in a way that makes sense, and I still don't really even know like whether or not they're a good fit, and so they're kind of going to be on their back foot. And you're basically just fighting an uphill battle from there, because the rest of the interview, you're going to have to fight tooth and nail to get back onto the good side. And even then, that might not be enough. And so really, really important here to set the proper tone. Now, the second reason that I think it's so important to really know how to talk about your own experiences is this question, as I mentioned, shows up in 99% of interviews and in networking situations. So not just when you're interviewing for a job, but when you are just meeting professionals in the same industry or maybe in a different industry, you're going to get asked in some way, shape, or form to tell them about your experiences. Like, who are you? Why are you here? What do you want? What are you looking to get out of this experience, right? And so really, really important, because we're going to be using this answer more times than we do any other type of interview question out there. But now that we've established why it matters, and I think most people understand this intuitively, let's talk about how we can actually master the 2-minute story, or the elevator pitch, or the tell me about yourself, whatever you want to call it. And in my mind, there are 2 main buckets that we need to focus on. The first is the content, aka what are we actually saying? What factual information are we bringing into this story? This, I think, many people understand. And then the second is the delivery, which is not what we are saying, but how we are saying it. And this part, I think, is where more people tend to underestimate the importance and overestimate their own ability with this side of the equation. But let's move back over to the content side first. So let's start with some ground rules. It's called a 2-minute story for a reason, which means you need to keep it concise. And so maximum 2 minutes. Ideally, probably like 90 seconds. Now, depending on what kind of person you are, you might have no problem with this, or you might be the kind of person that when they get nervous, they ramble and they talk on and on and on. And so you'll have trouble keeping it under 2 minutes. And so it's critically important that when you are preparing, that you keep in mind how long you actually take to deliver the entire story. And if you're someone who has more experience, or maybe you've done a lot of internships, or you have a lot of work experience, it can be tempting to talk a lot and go very in detail about each of your experiences because you're such a great candidate, right? Like you have so much relevant experience, you just want to put it all out there. But the problem is, look, the 2-minute story, the purpose of it is not to go super deep into all of your experience. You have the entire interview to do that if the interviewer is so inclined, but you need to just give them a sample and a taste of the surface level. And then wherever they're interested, they can then dig in and ask follow-up questions about. So keep it under 2 minutes. That's a hard and fast rule. Don't go over. There's really no reason to do so. Now, the second piece is it has to have a logical flow and it has to be a story. It's called a story for a reason. And that means that when someone asks you, can you walk me through your resume? They're not actually asking you to walk them through every single line of their resume. No, God, no. Nobody wants that. What they are asking for is for you to select the most relevant bits and pieces from your resume and then weave them all together in a cohesive, captivating story that logically makes sense. And by the end of it, they shouldn't be wondering, wait, then why the heck are you here, right? And so it's critically important to make sure that the experiences that you're bringing up in your story are relevant and also are tied to each other in a logical way. Like it can't be really sudden, like, oh, I was doing this and then I suddenly switched over to this job. No, you have to explain why and it has to make sense. And I'll come back to this logical flow in a second here, but moving along, it also has to be high level, as I mentioned, because again, we're trying to keep it under 2 minutes, but it also has to be detailed enough where it's believable and where you have enough detail to tell a good story that's actually interesting. And finally, last but not least, it has to end with how you are excited to be there. It shouldn't end with them being like, wait, why are you here? Like, you talked about all these experiences, but like it doesn't make sense to me why you're here. And it also shouldn't end with you being kind of like, and yeah, so that's my story, right? No, you need to convey a sense of excitement, and by the end of the story, they should also feel kind of excited and happy. Like there should be an optimistic energy in the air when you end your story. Now, before we move over to the delivery section, I do want to go back to this part about the logical flow of the story, because I know there's going to be some people who are asking questions like, okay, can you give me like an example of how you would do this, or a structure for how I can create my own story and make it logical and not just like a repetitive listing of all the things on my resume? Well, lucky you, I came up with this thing in the last 5 minutes called the stupid simple structure, and I think it'll be very helpful for people who are maybe more in the beginning stages of crafting their stories, but even if you're someone who's already done lots of interviews, I think you can get some value out of this, so just pay attention here. So the framework is basically, you start with your origin, or aka you talk about where you're from, where your location is, maybe it's where you were born, for example, and then you transition to your education, which is where you go to school or where you graduated. Now these first two should not take more than 10 seconds max, okay? You also talk about what you studied, and then you move into experience one. Now experience one, if you're a student, maybe it's like an on-campus internship. But if you're a working professional, experience one is probably going to be whatever your first job out of college was. And you talk about that for a little bit. And then you transition to maybe another experience. So I'll put experience two here. Now there's room for more experiences if you so wish to include, but eventually you have to transition over to today, which is how did the last experience, in this case experience two, lead to where you are today, which is seeking a new role, or maybe in a new industry, or at least at a different company. And so you have to tie each of these bullets together with what I call a pivot point. And a pivot point is basically when you take a story or an experience from the current role, and you talk about how that current role has led you to actually start exploring something new. Now, how might you do that? Well, there's a few ways that you can do it. One, the one that I like the most, is you talk about a project or some sort of work that you did at your current role. And you talk about how much you've learned from it, how much you've enjoyed it. And maybe there's one specific aspect about it that you enjoyed more than others. And that specific aspect about it also happens to be something that in this new role, you'll get a lot of exposure to. Or maybe this new industry, if you're trying to switch industries, maybe that type of job entails a lot more of this specific kind of work, right? And that is why you want to transition over. It's really important to be specific and to be detailed here, because if you don't, and you just say something vague like, oh yeah, and so I'm actually now interested in product management and I want to transition over to that even though right now I'm doing nothing related to that. No, you can't do that because that's not going to be believable, right? You have to show, not tell. And so you show by basically talking about tangible things that you've actually done at your current role. Or if you're a student, maybe it's like something that you've been doing on campus or in class that has led you to actually be interested in this particular industry. That is how you want to talk about these pivot points. And so each pivot point will logically explain why you want to transition over to the next experience or why you did move over to the second experience. And then ultimately you need a final pivot point, which leads to where you are today, talking about and so that's why for me the logical next step is to explore positions in management consulting, for example, or investment banking. So hopefully this is helpful for y'all. It's pretty easy to remember. It's just yeet. And if you can just follow this simple structure and make it very logical and include the pivot points while keeping your words very concise and under 2 minutes, then you have already nailed the content piece of the 2-minute story. Easy. But now let's talk about the delivery. And as I said earlier, the delivery is the one area where I think a lot of people tend to underestimate its importance and overestimate their own ability to do this properly. First things first, remember that although you are interviewing at a company that probably you really, really want a job at, and maybe you really look up to these people that work there, you think the work that they're doing is really, really interesting, is very impactful, and you can really see yourself working there. And also all the colleagues, all the people that work at this company or in this industry, they're all so smart, they have really pedigreed backgrounds, maybe they're really intelligent, maybe you've met some of them and you're really impressed by their backgrounds. Now that's all good, but remember not to put them on a pedestal. And remember that at the end of the day, the person that's interviewing you on the other side of the table is still a human, and they still have trouble getting up and going to work every day sometimes. They also have worries and anxieties, same as you. They stress over stuff at work, same as you. And at the end of the day, they're just another person. And so don't treat them like they are some kind of all-powerful God or something, right? Although they have power over whether or not you move on in the interview process, you can't come across as needy. And actually, that's a really big turnoff in the interview process. So you want to avoid that at all costs. And you need to remember that just be a human, okay? The easiest way to do that is remember to smile, remember to laugh if something's funny. It's okay, right? I know you want to be really professional and show them that you're a really capable person, but there is a way to do that without coming across as a complete robot. And it's much harder to smile, I know, when you're in an interview sometimes because you're really, really nervous. But you have to kind of force yourself to consciously remember, look, if you smile and you can get the other person to smile, that is a huge win for you, because when they smile, they feel good, and then they feel good about you afterwards, and they're like, wow, I had a really great conversation with that person. I wonder why. And so don't forget to be human and smile. So the second thing is you have to speak like you work there. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, there's two things. Speaking like you work there means that 1, you speak with confidence, like you deserve to be there. 2, you speak the lingo that they speak, and you understand how they talk to one another and how they communicate. Now, if you've networked with people in this industry or at this company, you will already have a better sense of how they kind of talk about different things, what they like to focus on, etc., what their tonality is, whether they're a very formal kind of setting or if it's more casual, what the culture's like. That's what I mean when I say speak like you already work there. And last but not least, is you need to remember to dial up the energy. Now, this is something that I received feedback from a close mentor of mine years ago when I was still a student recruiting for roles in investment banking. And after multiple rounds of failed interviews, I couldn't seem to get past the first round. I went to this person, I asked them, I don't know what's going wrong. Like, I have prepared hours for these investment banking interviews, and I have practiced over and over, but for some reason, I can't seem to progress. And this mentor of mine, whom I was pretty close with, we had done some mock interview sessions together, he told me, look, I think one thing that you can do to improve is you can actually try to dial up the energy, as in if there's like a dial of your energy levels, and your baseline is maybe down here, because Matt, you're a relatively reserved person, like I'm an introvert naturally, and so I actually prefer to sort of have a more calm, collected energy. If you dial up that energy level in the interview, actually I think it won't come across as excessive like you think it will. In fact, I think the interviewer will actually perceive it as just the right amount of energy. And so the next interview I went into, I tried that and I dialed up the energy, and I went in and I was like super hyped up. I took some time to really get excited before going into the interview room, and it actually worked very well. And ultimately I did get a role in investment banking. Now, while that might not be the sole reason that I landed the offer, I do want to point out that something that most people do not think about when it comes to interviewing. And I'm going to share with you some insights that I've learned over years, having done lots of interviews across investment banking, management consulting, private equity, hedge funds, and now tech, is that this concept of energy and conviction transfer is really, really important. When you go into an interview, you're basically coming in with a ton of conviction, right, about you as a candidate. I believe I'm the best candidate for this role. I have all the experiences required, and I am the most qualified. I deserve to work here, right? That's what the energy that you're coming in with. The other person interviewing you, on the other hand, they're talking to like 10, 20 people today. They have a conviction level about you that is very low. And so your job in the interview is actually to raise their level of conviction so that hopefully it matches yours, but at the very least, it ends higher than it started at the beginning of the interview. And now the things that you do and whatever you say in the interview all has the effect of either raising or lowering their level of conviction in you as a candidate. But practically speaking, what this means for you is that in terms of how you present yourself in the interview is you should come in with a really high level of energy and conviction about yourself as a candidate, because they oftentimes will not have or share that same level of enthusiasm about you as a candidate. And even if they don't show that, it's okay. Don't let it get to you. If you walk into an interview room and the other person just seems really bored, don't let it affect you. Know that it's not their job to be just as excited about interviewing you when you're candidate number 15 that walks through the door, right? So it's your responsibility to bring that energy and to bring that conviction. And so if you can keep that in mind when you're delivering your story, you're going to find that it comes across so much better, much more optimistic and natural, and definitely not like a robot. Because I think what makes people come across as robotic is when the words that they're saying don't match the energy level. Like, for example, maybe you're saying all these things about oh, I'm so passionate about technology and AI. But then the way that you're saying is yeah, I'm so passionate about technology and AI. I can't wait to work on cutting edge problems and really impact the world. Doesn't it sound really fake? Well, it sounds fake because my body language isn't matching the words that I'm saying. Now, on the other hand, if I talk to you and I say, I'm so excited about these cutting edge problems that we're solving here at Google. We're integrating AI into all of our products, and it's really exciting to see this as we push it out to our billion user products, how we're just changing the lives of people all around the world. Doesn't that sound so much more natural and so much more believable? And it's because the energy level matches the words and the message that I'm delivering. But taking a step back now, how do we actually improve the delivery? Well, actionable steps for you that you can do literally today after this video is you can start recording yourself. Now, I've said this in a lot of videos before, and I'm going to say it again because I really believe that recording yourself is the #1 fastest way to get feedback on your delivery. There's nobody who's a harsher critic than yourself. And so if you record yourself and you watch back the recording, you hear how you sound, you look at your body language, your facial expressions, you're going to cringe, I can guarantee it. But that's a good thing, because it means that you have room to improve. And it means that you're also self-aware enough to know that you need to improve your communication and your delivery. And so rewatch it a couple times after you practice your story. Make sure that it's under 2 minutes. Watch it once and look at how your facial expressions are. Watch it another time and really focus on the vocal tonality and your expressions. Watch it another time and focus on like your overall body language. And each time, focus on improving 1 or 2 aspects of your vocal tonality, your body language, and your facial expressions. And if you do that, honestly, before every interview, even a couple times, what you're gonna find is that you're going to improve so much quicker, and you're gonna come across just so much better in interview situations. And people are just gonna walk out of the interview with you thinking to themselves like, wow, I really want that guy on my team.